Hello everyone, today I will tell a brief story about random numbers. As you can imagine, we do need to use random numbers in both our daily life and scientific research. However, how to generate them is something quite interesting. Let's start with a simple example, a guessing number game. Here, I randomly think of an integer number between 1 and 10 in my head. Then you can ask me 3 questions, but I can only use yes or no to answer them. Then you need to tell me what this number is. This game sounds simple, but actually it could be highly intelligent because you need to figure out the best strategy and ask really good questions to get it solved. For example, for the first question, you can ask something like, is it an even number? Or is this number greater than 5? Because by doing this and learning the answer, you can narrow down the candidates by 50%. Some other questions you can think of include, is it a prime number? Is it a multiple of 3? Or you can even ask some combination questions like, is this number among 2, 4, and 7? Anyway, I suggest you to play this game with your friends, and maybe you can find some really creative and efficient questions to help solve it. Of course, the focus here is not about this game, but about the generation of the random number as a start. So what is the random number? It could be anyone within the set range, but it must be not predictable, not discernible, and not repeating. Simply speaking, we can never guess what it is. Hopefully you agree with me that it is possible to generate a random number from human's mind. For example, if you think of a number randomly in your head, there is no way I can guess it. Unless some of your friends tell me that you always like even numbers or the 6 is your lucky number, that could be less random. So if you want to avoid the certain human subjectivity, we can use some natural objects to help us to choose such a random number. For example, we can use a die. By rolling it, we can get a random number between 1 and 6. Of course, here, this die must have very uniform distribution of the weight. It's not like one side is heavier than the others. We can also produce a mauve-faced polyhedron, and for example, for this one, we can use it to generate a random number between 1 and 12. If we use a suite of the playing cards, for example, the club ace to king, so if you shuffle them, place them down, and if I randomly pick up one from these cards, and actually we can produce a random number between 1 and 13. And if you have seen this national lottery machine, I'm sure all the balls inside must have the same size, shape, and weight. And by stirring them and using certain mechanism to just allow one of them to come out, I'm sure all these balls must have the equal opportunity. So the next big question is, can a random number be generated by computer? In the recent years, we have witnessed the amazing development of the computer technology, particularly around artificial intelligence. Nowadays, the AI can beat human world champion of the chess, and by looking at a photograph, it can tell what plant or animal is. And some AI could be a good GP. By telling it what symptoms are, it could suggest a disease with very high accuracy. And also nowadays, there appear some AI tools like ChatGPT, which can be used to write an essay or article, and they could be better than the one written by most of us. Anyway, with such advance in the computer technology, if I ask this question again, can a random number be generated by computer? You will be shocked by the answer, which is no. This is actually one of the biggest differences between the artificial intelligence and human intelligence. If someday the computer can create a random number spontaneously, it could be something quite scary or disaster for the human being. However, you have still seen lots of random numbers generated by the computer through some programs. So let's just have a look what is going on behind the scene. There are two types of the random numbers generated by the computer. One through true random number generator, and another through pseudo random number generator. Let's have a look at them one by one. In the true random number generator, the computer is connected to a sensor which can pick up the signals from the natural environment. So in the nature, there are lots of things which have demonstrated some true randomness. For example, the atmospheric noise. If you monitor it, you will see sometimes it's going up, sometimes it's going down in a random pattern. Also, for the electric current, there is a natural fluctuation. The same applies for the infrared radiation. So that means if we use the sensor to pick up these signals, we will see it will just randomly bouncing up and down. And the sensor can convert them into the numbers using something called digitizer. And the computer can use them to generate the random numbers. So these random numbers are true because they are derived from the natural resources. However, they have to heavily rely on these natural resources, and if there is anything wrong going with them, there must be some problem with the random number generated. The second type is pseudo-random number generator, and here the computer will use its own computational power to generate it. However, to generate a pseudo-random number, you have to provide the computer with a seed value initially, and the computer will apply very complicated mathematical operations on this seed value and produce a sequence of numbers that appears random. You may identify a problem here if the computer applies the same mathematical operation and if you supply with the same seed value, this number could be not really random. So here, I will give you an example. If I want the computer to generate a random integer number between 0 to 9, I can input a seed number and ask the computer to do a square root calculation. Except for some square numbers, the square root of most numbers will be an irrational value, which has infinite and non-reoccurring decimal places. And then I can just take the 20th decimal place as this random number. So for example, if I use the 34 as the seed value and do the square root calculation of it, and you can see the 20th decimal place is 7. Unless I use the calculator to check this value, there is no way for me to know this decimal place is 7. So here, the random number 7 is quite a good one. Of course, for the computer, it has to make use of its superb calculational power to produce a random number which is far more unpredictable. For example, some computers just make use of this so-called linear congruential generator. By using this equation, where a, b, and m are very large integers, and the seed value is x0, it can just perform these recycling calculations round and round and produce a really good random number. And actually, you don't have to always provide the computer with a seed value, and you can ask the computer to find one by itself. For example, each computer has got a clock within it, and this clock is pretty accurate. For all the computers, this clock is at least as accurate as 0.01 second. Okay, so if you look at the computer clock, here shows how many hours, here how many minutes, here how many seconds, and here is 0.1 second and 0.01 second. If you have seen the timers in the Olympic Games, you will see this 0.1 second and 0.0 second, they are crazily fast moving. And if you stop at any time, there is no way for us to predict the value of them. So that means if you want the computer to produce a random number, and when the computer receives this command, it will look at its clock at that particular moment and take these 2 digits as the seed value and then put it into this calculation, for example, and produce a random number which is good enough for us to use. Anyway, in this story, we have talked about how to generate a random number by the humans and by the computers. If you want to learn more about this topic, maybe you can look at these 2 websites. Okay, thank you very much.